This video contains shocking themes and spoilers throughout. You have been warned. I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. This was the opinion of Albert Einstein, and it was woven into the script of a devastating TV movie created to warn world leaders about the consequences of nuclear warfare. 1983's The Day After shows us the build-up to and the impact of a nuclear assault on the state of Missouri. Due to it being made and released during the new Cold War of 1979 to 1985, where tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were rising, The Day After became the highest rated made-for-TV movie in history, holding that record for over 25 years, with more than 100 million people tuning in. This important piece of television is the topic of today's episode. Before jumping in, please check the link below to our upcoming project, The Horror Exchange, but for now, let's talk about why The Day After is nightmare fuel. The film starts off in a rather mundane fashion, showing us a series of typical people with common circumstances. It familiarises the audience with several characters that we follow in chunks, and it's how trivial their lives are which makes the world here feel authentic. It's like a blanket statement. Even though we are in and around Kansas City, this could be anywhere in America, but the normality of the world is gradually pierced by the fears of a global conflict, cleverly weaving its way into conversation via the media. Radio broadcasts, TV broadcasts, newspapers, and word of mouth are all utilised here, supplying the people of the area with information. Initially, there is a conflict between East Germany and West Berlin, who segregate off from each other. This is seen as a violation of international law and therefore a potential act of war. The Soviet ambassador meets with the White House for discussions, but things don't go so well when there are further updates of two Soviet-built MiGs firing missiles in West Germany at a NATO munitions storage facility, hitting a school and a hospital in the attack. Things are seriously getting heated and looking dangerous, especially when there are innocent people, including children, injured and killed by the attacks. Yet we never see any of this in the film. We only ever hear about it, and I personally find that a lot scarier. It's like the towns here are in a bubble where all they know is what they hear through the media, and they are under threat by a devastating force, yet they have nothing to go off other than words. Naturally, as those words become more chaotic, like when it's confirmed that the Russians have boots down in West Germany, hysteria sets in. People become frightened, panic buying takes place in grocery stores, confusion and a lack of direction set in. The film's most prominent character, Dr. Oakes, played wonderfully by Jason Robards, has a couple of conversations which demonstrate the severity of what is happening. When it comes to the idea of nuclear missiles actually being used, Oakes utters the immortal line, "People are crazy, but not that crazy." These words come back to haunt him when the threat levels heighten, and in one chat, the current scenario is described as making Hiroshima look like peanuts. Peanuts here means small and insignificant, when Hiroshima saw the deaths of an estimated 140,000 people. That's a significantly high number of people. So for that to be considered peanuts in comparison to what would happen to America, it really does indicate the scale of the targets. Kansas City's population in the 1980 census was 448,000 people. That's nearly 100,000 higher than the population of Hiroshima at the time of its bombing, and Kansas City is just one of the targets in this film. After the Americans and Russians go at it in the Persian Gulf, the final straw has been pulled from the fist of anger. Now the big bangs are brought out to shift the world off its axis. After a nuclear bomb is used on NATO headquarters, the US launches Minuteman missiles towards Russia. The nearby silos are witnessed going into attack mode by the locals, with clouds of flames fuming up the lavish green farmland. The US has primed and fired their ambush against Russia, but Russia reflects this broken mirror image. Over 300 missiles are now inbound on the United States. However, However, the film intentionally doesn't reveal if it was the US who fired first or the Soviets. What was once a rather ordinary day has become Armageddon, even with the foreshadowed warnings of the potential hell that could be rained down on the soils of America. It still feels like a shock to the system when it's deemed the end is nigh. While people try to flee from Kansas City and its surrounding towns, including Lawrence and Harrisonville, there is an occurrence, one which Dr. Oakes describes as like the sun exploding. This is an EMP, which completely shuts down all electrical power in the area. This is the first, most telling sign that a nuke has detonated at a high altitude. This was just the earthquake, then comes the avalanche. Further missiles collide with America, causing all kinds of burnt orange carnage. Human beings and animals are turned to skeletons in a flash, adults and children alike. Structures are blown apart by the tenacious force of the blast. Flames engulf the weary, fleeing for their lives. This is a bombardment of death, reaching far and wide, choking the life out of a large, innocent population. The number of lives shattered on screen is barely countable, with the onslaught of nukes providing us with both a heartbreaking and eye-opening glimpse at the doomsday weapon of our species. However, as we come to see as the remainder of the film takes place, perhaps the ones who perished in the swirling nuclear flames were the lucky ones. Now, the ones who survived have to live with the fallout, not only of the explosions, but of their own grief and decay. The people we spend the most amount of time with are the Dahlberg family and Dr. Oakes, plus a bunch of other survivors in the Lawrence Hospital and around it. As their stories intersect, I'll cover the Dahlbergs first. At the point of the explosion, young Danny is blinded by the flash. His father, Jim, cradles him to safety, but he's clearly in need of medical attention. The family hides away in their cellar, biding their time, not even allowing the family dog in with them because it's another mouth to feed and quench. So the poor thing is just yelping and scratching at the door, wanting its family. From an empathetic perspective, this dog has been abandoned, left alone to die, but it's a strategic necessity in these desperate situations. But one extra mouth does arrive in the form of a young student named Stephen, bringing his own supply of food and begging for shelter. He's allowed in, an act of kindness in a crazed world. After days of being tucked away in darkness, Denise Dahlberg begins to lose her mind, struggling to remember the face of her fiancé, who she has been separated from in the attack. This is a very human element, being cut off from a loved one, desperately wanting the comfort of their presence to help you calm down to a tranquil state. But as Denise doesn't have that, she legs it outside, and Stephen chases her down to retrieve her, exposing them both to the fatal levels of radiation out in the open. The fallout has already started to snow down on Kansas, and anybody caught up in it is now a ticking time bomb waiting to erode. We witness some truly horrific moments out in the open, such as a war veteran memorial monolith having an old man and young boy lying dead at its base, and a rapidly filling pit of occupied body bags where, due to running low on supplies, one person asks if trash can liners can be used as a substitute. Innocent, ordinary human beings, now just one of many corpses thrown into a hole, packaged up in bags made for trash. The complete disregard for the preciousness of life during nuclear warfare is amplified in these small moments of clarity within the ashen towns of Missouri. As the rad count begins to ebb, the Dahlbergs head to the remains of a church in a visually striking scene. These people have gathered together so that the word of the Lord can guide them, while the physics of the universe are breaking them. Even the priest here struggles to keep it together. It's a chilling dichotomy, one where the grace and glory of God becomes well hidden by deadly clouds. Denise begins to bleed through her skirt, and combining that with Danny's eyes, Stephen decides to take them to the hospital in Lawrence to be seen to. Just walking to the hospital is enough exposure to seal their fates, but they've got to keep hopeful, like when Danny asks what's around them in the fields, and he's told that it's cows, telephone poles, the usual stuff, when the area is actually swarming with dead carcasses. But Danny is a smart kid, and even though he is seen at the hospital by Dr. Sam, he can sense the trembling in his voice. There's no fixing Danny. A child is now blind because of this war, but it doesn't matter either way, because it won't be long until he fades away. This is sadly the fate of most people who gather in Lawrence, including Dr. Oakes. This is where his story intersects. He witnesses 2 explosions while on the freeway, and he walks to the Lawrence Hospital, taking control there. He does everything he can to help people, though admits that he doesn't quite know why he works so hard, given the probable outcome. He knows that exposure to the outdoors is fatal. That's where he came from. That's where more and more patients come from, so why bother? It's all a matter of trying to have hope in a hopeless world, even though that is a very difficult case to argue. As time goes on, the sights in the hospital grow increasingly bleak, with numerous people weakening, their conditions worsening, their hair going grey and falling out. We even get one horrendous jump scare scene when, during a quiet conversation about cockroaches and their imperviousness to radiation, a bloodied, bandaged patient sits up and screams in the foreground. It's such an instant move, one which flips the tonality of the scene on its head, and was one of my most memorable moments from the film. Oakes collapses from the strain, nearing his end, but he wants to see Kansas City before he dies. Heading out, he sees firing squads picking off criminals who have started to ravage the land. We even get a look at one group who shoots down Jim Dahlberg on his own property. As if the post-apocalypse wasn't enough, now the criminal underbelly has rolled over and revealed its warts. Oakes gets back home, seeing that Kansas is nothing but rubble, charred human remains, and dust. He finds a group of people squatting in what is left of his house, and shouts for them to get out. However, after being offered food, one glimmering moment of humanity in this somber world, Oakes and the old man embrace each other. They've gone through their entire lives, long lives, happy lives, all to reach this brutal climax, heading quickly towards their deathbeds, in the knowledge that they are not going to be comfortable, and that the world they know is no more. It's a really touching scene. Then, in a spine-tingling closing text roll, it is said that the events of the film are very likely an understatement to the severity of what would really happen. It's a message to world leaders. This is a gentle version of what could be. The reality would be far worse. Reading this made me shudder, especially with the grueling 2 hours I just experienced. What I've discussed in this video is only a selection of moments. There are so many more tiny pieces which have the ability of making your heart sink and your guts wrench. There's a real scale to the film, whether it's the body pit or the basketball court full of bodies, not knowing which are alive or dead. The weapons that could make this happen exist. They're sitting there somewhere dormant, behind the pushes of buttons and the turning of keys. It's films like The Day After that are far from gentle reminders that life is unkind, and that if the wrong men with the wrong mentality are in the right place at the right time, this is what we face. Thank you for watching this episode covering the nightmare fuel of The Day After. I'm Connor from Unleash the Ghouls, and I shall be waiting in the fallout shelter with another dose of nightmare fuel.